Kevin, would you put away your phone? We're trying to do a podcast here.
I don't have my phone out. Actually, I do need to put it in Do Not Disturb
See,
mode.
this is exactly what I'm talking about. And you know what? This problem, friends, it is not only happening on podcasts in schools across this country. We are having the debate of what do we do with phones during school time. And last week, Kevin, on the Hard Fork podcast, Governor Kathy Hochul of New York came on to lay out her plan for getting rid of phones in public schools.
Yeah.
And as you might imagine, we heard from listeners about that. In fact, we spent the past couple of weeks asking you to send in your thoughts on the subject. And we heard from so many of you who had smart things to say that we said, why don't we actually spend some time playing those on the show?
Yeah, and I always love hearing from our listeners, but I was especially interested to hear from them on this topic of smartphone bans in schools, because it seems like a thing where a policy is being made, or many policies are being made around the country, and the reality on the ground of what those policies actually look like when you try to ban phones in a school is just a lot more mysterious to me. Like, I don't actually know. It's one thing to say we're going to ban smartphones, but when you actually start a school year and you open school and kids come to school with their cell phones and you tell them they can't use them during class, I was just very curious to see how that is actually playing out.
Absolutely. We talk so often about these policy debates on the show, Kevin, but what's really interesting to me is what is happening on the ground. How does it feel? How do these things get implemented? And how does life change afterwards? So we have a really cool selection of students and teachers describing what it is like at their schools that have banned phones, in some cases just in the last few weeks. So I know we're going to learn a lot from this, and I think we should get into it.
Let's get into it.
All right. So first up, we're going to hear from students. We heard from several students who made a similar argument, which went something like this. Even though the phone ban seems to be helping them focus better in class, it's not clear to them that this outweighs all the friction that has come from enforcing that policy. So to give us a little glimpse into what that looks like, here's Robert Eves. He's a high school student in Virginia.
While I understand the idea behind banning phones, I believe it is a mixed bag. On one hand, it's definitely noticeable that there are fewer distractions in class. However, the execution of this ban has been too strict. We're not allowed to use the phones at all, and this has created some challenges. For example, some students like me will eventually need to use external laptops or devices other than our Chromebooks for specific courses, and this is no longer permitted. Teachers have told all of my classes that they dislike the ban because they want to enforce a phone ban when they themselves want to, not the school board or administration. They dislike the idea of having to constantly monitor the students. In fact, every high school teacher I've talked to has expressed their distaste for it. Overall, while the intention might be good, the ban's current form doesn't consider the practical needs of students and teachers, at least in my district.
Interesting. Kevin, what do you make of Robert's point here?
So this is really interesting to me because I think what we're starting to see as these bans actually kick in a lot of schools this fall is that it's just pretty messy. Like the actual process of how do you get phones out of students' hands during the classroom day is not particularly straightforward. And there are going to be exceptions. There are going to be places where it does cause friction because, some students may be using their phones for school-approved activities or even coursework. It's just not going to be a very simple, neat policy to kind of lay down.
Yeah, and in order for it to work the way we think it should, you do have to get the phones out of everyone's hands, right? If one person has a phone, that's incredibly distracting for the entire class. So, I can understand why teachers who already have so much on their plate are saying, wait, now I also have to play phone cop all day? That doesn't sound very fun. Let's hear a similar point that was made by Charlotte. She's a high school student in Indiana, where a state Senate bill recently went into effect requiring schools to adopt and publish policies limiting cell phone use.
Hello, my name is Charlotte, and I'm from Indiana. I have mixed feelings about this bill. For one, I feel like I'm focusing better in school. I'm not thinking about my phone since it's usually in a phone cubby or in my backpack, but it is annoying that I can't have my phone during study hall. When I don't have any homework to do, I just kind of sit there. It's also a hassle during my newspaper class. Whenever I'm walking through the building to an interview, recording it, etc., I have to wear a lanyard around my neck that says press pass with a paragraph that states that I am actually allowed to have my phone. No one's bothered me about it yet, but I always feel like I'm doing something illegal.
Charlotte, I'm here to tell you, you're not doing something illegal. You're doing something incredibly cool, okay? If I could have walked around my high school with a pass that said press pass using a piece of technology that no one else in the school was allowed to use, I truly never would have felt cooler.
Totally. And it does make me think that, at least in this one particular school, the newspaper class is about to become the most popular class in the school.
Yes, they're going to start 15 different newspapers at this school because everybody wants to use their phone.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I will say, on a less joking note, like, I have some sympathy for students who say, well, I'm used to having my phone to sort of like kill time during study hall after I finish my work, and I'm sort of bored without it. But I also feel like, man, that feeling of being bored, of just sitting there with nothing to distract you and having to kind of like sit there with your own thoughts or, doodle or maybe sort of think through some idea, like that is actually like a classic part of the learning experience. At least it was for me.
Yeah, I think that as boring as it is, there is a case to be made for sitting there with your own thoughts. These days, I'm not alone with my thoughts often. I always have my earbuds in, but I do think it was an important part of my development.
Do you think doodling is going to make a comeback?
I think it should.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, kids these days, they don't even know how to do the fancy S.
All right, now you sound 400 years old. So something else that we heard in voice memos from students is that each school is implementing their phone ban just a little bit differently, and that subtle differences in enforcement can wind up having a really big effect on how students feel about the ban. So here's a student who says he's been able to get permission to use his phone whenever he's really needed it. His school has been using these pouches called Yonder pouches. Have you ever used a Yonder pouch?
I never have. Have you?
I haven't, but they're increasingly common. If you go to see a stand-up comedian, for example, they'll sort of take everybody's phones and throw them in their pouches. I imagine Yonder's having a great business year with how many schools are passing these bans, but that can only be unlocked with a special device. And according to this student who sent in a voice memo, the pouches are working pretty well. So let's hear from Jackson McClure in Redwood City, California, right by us, Kevin.
Hey, Hard Fork. I'm a 9th grader at Design Tech High School, and actually, just today, I had to fix my tooth because I chipped it on a mountain biking trip. Yay! And and believe it or not, it wasn't actually that hard to just go to the front desk, say I need to use my phone to call my mom for the appointment, and then they allowed me, and then I took photos of my tooth, and then had a conversation. We logged it back up, and I went on with my day. It seems like it's not too hard just to get access to it if you really need it. And honestly, not having it really just seems like just a benefit anyway.
So this is why I think that students shouldn't be allowed to ride their mountain bikes inside the classroom. It's too dangerous. We're seeing too many of these injuries. No, Jackson, I hope you're feeling better. But, this is an interesting point that he makes, which is essentially, hey, everybody relax. If you have an emergency, go to the front desk. What's the big deal? What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, I totally buy that. I mean, I think that the students will still have many ways to contact their parents or guardians if something does happen to them. This one resonated with me because I actually did have a tooth chipping incident. When I was in 7th grade, I chipped my tooth while doing a professional wrestling move on one of my friends.
And what was that move?
It was the spear. This was Goldberg, who was a professional wrestler back in the 90s. He had a move called the spear.
That's right.
Which involves like running headfirst into someone. And I was trying to spear my friend, and he moved out of the way. And so instead I speared a locker, and my tooth chipped.
But you know what? That locker also took a fair bit of damage. So you should see the other guy, basically.
And I'll never forget it because my one of the people who was watching as this all happened was my crush. And so she saw me with a chipped tooth sort of bleeding out of my mouth, and I'll never recover from that. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is that I made my way to the nurse's office, and I was able to call my mom and get to the dentist to fix my tooth. And this was before cell phones. So what I'm saying is the students of America do actually have resources if they chip their teeth during the school day, and I'm glad that Jackson found that out.
But Kevin, don't you wish in retrospect that somebody had a cell phone so they could record you sparing a locker and sort of put that on TikTok in a compilation called Terrible High School Nerd Fails?
Yes, actually now I'm very glad that cell phones with cameras did not exist back then. And look, on a more serious note, like there will obviously be reasons that students need to contact their parents during the school day. And actually, this is one of the big objections that many parents have raised to these cell phone bans is, what if something horrible happens and my child needs to get in contact with me during the school day? And, I have some sympathy to that. As
I
a
do too.
parent, as someone who, worries a lot about my child's safety, I get wanting to be able to contact your kid during the school day on a cell phone. But I also think that there were ways for students to do that before cell phones. There will continue to be ways. It's not that hard to sort of get to the principal's office, get to the nurse's station. There are going to be avenues for students to contact their parents in an emergency.
There's something very funny to me about the words, please open my yonder pouch.
Why is that?
I don't know. It kind of sounds like a pickup line. Anyways, so we've heard from students, but Kevin, we should also hear from teachers. As we sort of mentioned earlier, these are often the folks who are charged with implementing these bans, and we were very curious to hear what they've been noticing. So this first clip comes to us from Ryan Bedingfield, who is a high school AV teacher in Atlanta, Georgia, and he told us how his opinion on phone bans has changed a little over the last 3 weeks.
I teach a tech class. We have MacBooks and all kinds of other things. We record audio on the phones. We shoot photos, videos. We even use a Discord server actually to organize stuff. And so I've seen a lot of practical use out of phones in my room. I've tried to kind of be forward thinking and make technology part of the curriculum. But my administration, the schools doing the no cell phone thing. And so I tried to get on board. And I got to tell you, it has been kind of amazing, actually. The kids are just so much more engaged and alert. And I feel like I'm connecting with them better. It sounds so cheesy, but I can't oversell that. It's like, we're actually here, we're doing teaching and learning. So like I said, I worried about the way this would affect my class, but I think there's just no question that the net benefits outweigh the costs or the inconveniences. And I would hate to go back to unrestricted cell phone use at this point already. I'm fully committed.
Wow. What do you think, Kevin?
I mean, this one really struck me because this is not a teacher who sort of came in as someone who was skeptical about technology in the classroom, right? He did sort of try to use cell phones as part of the curriculum in the classes that he was teaching. And, I think I admire that. Like there are a lot of teachers who sort of have been opposed to phones in schools from the beginning, but this was a teacher who actually said, well, if students are going to have these things and we're not going to ban them, let's try to find a productive use. But to me, trying to find a productive educational use of cell phones in the classroom is a little like trying to find a productive educational use for a swarm of bees in the classroom. Maybe you can do it, but no one's going to be focused on the lesson, right? And so I think it's really helpful to hear from teachers who came in thinking, with some skepticism toward these bans and just say, as Ryan does, that it has totally changed their classroom essentially overnight.
I mean, it makes sense to me. One of my least favorite things that will happen sometimes when I'm sitting there with friends or family is there's a brief lull in the conversation and the next thing you know, everyone is looking at their phone. And you can just sort of feel that person's life force draining away from you and sort of being funneled into their phone. And, that can be okay from time to time if you're just having dinner with someone. But what if I was trying to teach you calculus? All of a sudden, it feels like we're having a much worse time. So everything that Ryan said there made a lot of sense to me. So let's hear from another teacher now, Kevin. This comes from Taylor Wynn. And he says that a phone ban in his school has been effective, but only after administrators intervened to get the teachers to stop resisting it.
Hey, Kevin and Casey. My name is Taylor. I am a high school teacher. I teach AP Physics. I've been teaching for about 12 years now in Orange County, California. So I've taught through the 2010s, and basically the phone problem has always been a thing since I started. But when the kids came back from the COVID shutdowns, it was the worst it had ever been. Before the pandemic, kids would obviously, they'd be on their phones all the time. They're texting back and forth. They're checking, their social media. But there would at least be a lot of noise and sound and socialization in my classroom whenever there was any sort of downtime or if the kids were waiting for me to get something ready. But one of the craziest things was when we first came back from the shutdowns, if there was any sort of downtime, the class would remain absolutely silent. It was the most eerie thing ever because essentially, like if I finished my lessons early and I looked out there, kids would just whip out their phones and they would just all start doom scrolling very silently next to each other, like even if they were like sitting next to all of their best friends. But recently, I will say that about like last year, our admin team put up a huge effort to buy pretty much every single classroom teacher one of those phone pocket charts. It's like this big thing that hangs on your wall. It looks like those things where people can like organize their shoes in them, but it's like specifically for kids to put phones inside of those pockets. And there's one for each kid in the room. And at first it was met with a lot of opposition from students. Students didn't want to give up their phones. They were coming up with clever ways to get around it. They would get like burner phones and put the burner phones into the pockets. They would take their phone out of their phone covers and they would put the phone covers into the pocket. So visually it looks like there's a phone there, but if you look closely, there's no phone inside of like the phone case. And honestly, a lot of teachers oppose it too, because a lot of veteran teachers kind of felt like, you know what, I've been here, done that. It's always been a big issue. This is just kind of a waste of our efforts. But honestly, our admin team actually did kind of just enforce it over and over and over again, kind of like, you know, sort of chastising, you know, teachers that weren't getting on board at first. The idea was like, if everybody does it, it just becomes part of school culture. And honestly, we started the school year and every single staff member's on board. Day one, every teacher was just kind of like, yeah, you know what? You come into the classroom. The first thing you do, you're going to drop your phone into this pocket. It's assigned to you. I'm going to be using it to like double check attendance or whatnot. And it's been going smooth. It's been going great. And better yet, I actually started noticing, you know, that it's healing a little bit. I'm actually noticing more lively discussions. I'm noticing that kids are paying more attention in class, and their grades are better. They're doing better. They're more present. So it's honestly been really, really nice.
All right, Kevin. So what's the lesson here?
I mean, I think the really interesting thing that is going to come out of this, one of them, is just that we're going to see a really natural experiment here. We're going to be able to measure the educational outcomes of students in schools that ban phones and schools that do not ban phones, and we're going to see over a period of years like what effect these policies actually have. And I don't want to venture a guess, but my initial impression is that at least from the teacher's perspective, this is leading to much better engagement with classroom instruction and, you know, better grades and better participation. And I would not be surprised if students who are in schools with phone bans a couple years from now just have better outcomes.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, we did not get a lot of messages saying ever since we banned phones, everything has been a lot worse. And now the students won't pay attention to us, right? So, you know, that is meaningful, I think. And the other lesson that I'm taking away from this call, Kevin, is that it just takes time to shift the culture of these schools. And that, yeah, at first you are going to see students coming up with all sorts of creative schemes to ensure they can keep looking. But over time, eventually they just give up and they actually throw the phone into the pocket.
Yep.
One sort of final thing to add about this, Kevin, is that we heard from a few listeners outside the United States. One parent in Melbourne, Australia, told us that phones have been banned in his kids' primary and secondary schools for 5 years, and his kids haven't complained, which seems very suspicious, frankly. That makes me think that they probably have phones that they're just not telling their dad about. And then there's an English-speaking teacher in a public school in Japan where all cell phones and devices are banned, including during sports and clubs after school. And this teacher told us that Japanese students also really seem to embrace the bans. So do we feel like there is actually kind of maybe a growing consensus around this issue?
Yeah, I actually, you know, I generally don't like sort of one size fits all approaches to, to sort of technology and to smartphones in general. But with this one, it does seem, man, like it is just going so well at so many schools across not only the United States, but the world. I just don't hear, you know, obviously there's some wrinkles to be ironed out when it comes to the actual implementation, but I mean, this just seems like such a no-brainer to me.
Yeah, I mean, and I feel like I'm often on the side of arguing for like people having access to technology, and yet I did not have a cell phone in high school, and I truly cannot think of a way that it would have improved my life if I could have had it in the classroom during class time, right? I still think that there is a case to be made for maybe some laptop use and digital literacy skills and all of that, but certainly at the elementary school level, I see absolutely no need for these kids to have these phones. And even into high school, it seems like the sort of plurality of people that we have spoken to have said this is the way to go.
Yeah. I mean, one possible effect of this that I'm fascinated to see if it actually materializes or not is that, I don't think students are going to stop using cell phones altogether, like outside the classroom and outside the school building. It may be that they just spend more time on their phones when they're at home with their parents or at soccer practice or whatever. There may actually be kind of a concentrating effect where by taking phones out of the school during the school day, you end up with kids spending way more time on their phones at night. I would also be interested to see how the usage of apps like Snapchat, apps like Instagram, apps like TikTok, if you could sort of graph their usage among younger users, whether they're going to see significant shifts in when people are using those apps during the day.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wonder if this is going to be a reason for maybe the stock prices of those companies to decline because they just lost 8 hours during the day that they can show ads to teenagers.
I mean, we're laughing, but like, I actually think that is probably something that they are having meetings about at these companies right now is like, oh my God, we're like losing some of our most active users for a big chunk of the day.
All right. Well, thank you so much to everyone who took the time to send us voice memos and share your perspectives. Like we said, as much as we love talking about the debate at the high level, frankly, it's just a lot more interesting to hear what's going on at your school. So thank you for that. And in the meantime, class dismissed.
And if you're a student who's watching Hard Fork on your contraband cell phone in school and you want to see more of our episodes, hit the button below to subscribe to our YouTube channel or the bell to get notified whenever we post a new episode. And be careful out there.